Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show, Ancient Secrets Revealed. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Sameshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And today we're going to do a kind of a delicate subject, the truth about Christmas. The whole idea of Christmas and, who Jesus was, is, and all of that is, there's so many opinions, and seems like no matter what you say, somebody's going to get upset or offended. But nevertheless, especially this time of year with Christmas around the corner, it's the elephant in the room. It's just so central, and I think it needs to be addressed. Before we begin, I wanted to I got some cards and letters for the holiday season. Charlotte sent one, other people sent them, and I just wanted to thank everybody. Appreciate it. Got some little gifts and things. It's all very much appreciated. So this whole thing about Christmas, basically it has two facets. And I'll start with what I think hopefully is the easier one. And that is just a note to atheists, agnostics, non-Christians, Christians, basically everybody. And what I'm talking about here is for all those people concerned, what does a healthy relationship with Christmas look like? And so in that regard, if there are two facets to Christmas, one of the very important facet, and it's overlooked on so many different levels throughout every year, and that is the whole idea of the cultural component and the importance of cultural integrity. I don't care if you're even an atheist, in this regard. And that is that tradition, we're human beings. They like it or not, we are cultural creatures. We are social creatures. And a culture's the awareness of the individuals, and through the individuals, society, and through the different societies all around the world, it cultures the mentality of the whole world. And so if somebody was like, well, I don't believe, in God or whatever they say, there's still the cultural component, which is extremely important to every individual. I know I've lived in different third world countries, and the dominant religion was this or that, different religions. And I never even crossed my mind to think that, we should demand equal time for these different major religions, because it misses the point. A religion upholds the culture, upholds society, upholds humanity. And through that culturing, people evolve. And in this time of such polarization between people, between groups, it's almost become vogue. I think there's a whole idea of a confusion around self-actualization. The idea is to actualize yourself. There's a no component to it. No, I don't believe that, and I'm going to stand up for what I believe. And on some level, that's okay. I get that. But then on another level, it kind of can trample the fine fabric of a civilization that supports the life and health of all the people. And so if I'm in a third world country and they're not into Christianity, they're into this or that religion, I can respect that. I do respect that. And we honor that because each civilization has its own unique relationship with God, with divinity. And so what word do we use for God, divinity, what have you? If you're Christian, then the perspective would be it's the Christ. And so it doesn't matter what religion we're talking about. There's that one thing, that one source. The only way is the way oftentimes Christians will put it. You know, Jesus is the only way. Well, there's only one Christ. There's only one unified field. You can say it different ways. There's only one Chaitanya. Different religions say it different ways. In the Veda, it's said another different way, you see. And so just basic respect and honoring and sharing of the feeling, the fine feeling. I mean, I think it's around Christmas time. I mean, even if you're driving in a car, you can feel the group consciousness of the celebration of Christmas, which cultures the heart and the minds of everybody. It's there. And that's true for all the different holidays. I mean, my goodness, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, Ohio State University football team. And even when there was an Ohio State University football game, you could feel it where you walk into a pharmacy or wherever. And you could, that was just the group consciousness, and it cultures, you see, a society. And it goes right from, neighborhood or even your own family to your neighborhood, to your town, your city, your state, country, and the world. So that's one component. Scotty, does that all make sense? Do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, it was funny because when you used the Ohio State reference, I was thinking about all of these religions as kind of a sport, like, one's football, one's basketball, one's baseball, whatever. It's like you can play all these sports and they're all beautiful sports. They're not everybody can play all these other sports or whatever, but the whole thing is not to just, I'm only going to play basketball and I'm going to destroy all the other sports.
Well, I get your point.
Yeah.
And there's truth to that. But at the same time, we're brought up in our own culture from childhood. And so there's a orientation of the mentality of the psyche. Like, obviously, I really am very much into Vedic knowledge. And I go to the Sri Someshwara temple every day. At the same time, I was brought up Christian. The holidays and things that really, how to say, float my boat, that really fill my heart. Christmas is really, I think, for me, the biggest one. And so there are these different holidays and different religions, and we can honor that. We can respect that. We can see the value of that. At the same time, it doesn't really support us to, abandon those roots that are so deep in the culturing of our own soul and our own heart. Yeah. And that's why I think if we after a number of years, as teenagers, adults, whatever, if we start looking at these different premises of Christianity, for example, or, I see it with the Hindus, a lot of the young kids, they come and the whole thing is weird to them. And so what happens is, instead of looking deeper and getting a deeper understanding, even just from a cultural perspective, but there's more than just a culture, but even just a cultural perspective, they can start to turn their back on that fine fabric that has been cultured deep within their heart and soul from childhood. So, I mean, if you were to ask me, are you a Hindu or are you a Christian? I mean, you build a Hindu temple. I call it a Vedic temple, but you build a temple. Which are you? Well, heart, soul, culturing of my awareness, I'm an American and I'm a Christian. That's just how I was raised. It's so resonates all the way to the DNA, you see. And so that facilitates the blossoming and the emergence of my own divinity from deep within my being all the way to the surface of life. And having said that, see, the beauty of the Vedic tradition is that the rigor of the understanding, the depth of the understanding, I mean, it's there in the Christian, it's there in the Bible, but it's not articulated, to my experience, as deeply and as thoroughly, as rigorously, not only from the heart perspective, but even more so in this regard, from the scientific or the intellectual perspective, the mechanics of creation, the nature of the whole thing. So I embrace both, but I guess, Scotty, what I'm saying is I embrace them in different ways, don't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, is it also, do you, what's going to feed evolution the best? Is it just being able to pick up and put down the tool that best serves the moment on that? Or do you go with, okay, how, because it's not just the culture that was developed in this time with you, but generations of people had been cultured and you're a culmination of that, so what is the kind of.
Yeah, it's a good point. And what best serves the moment? I mean, celebrating Christmas, you're going to feel into that. And if you're Christian and raised in Christian home and all that, then that value is embraced. Other times, the knowledge and the depth and the profundity of the Vedic tradition is so rich that I love it, and there's value there. And then, of course, we got into, as I've talked about in these podcasts so many times, the whole technology that's available and accessible through the Vedic tradition. How to build a unified field generator, a coherence harmony radiator, if you will, So in that sense, yes, Scotty, what best serves the moment, So anything more on that cultural component, Scotty?
It seems like it's like, one of the problems that we've been having is that I don't know if that's the cause of the problem, is that cultural aspect is thinning in a lot of places.
Yeah, it's a good point. And there was a study at Harvard University just recently, where as the attendance at churches goes down, mental health problems, suicide rates have been going up. And so what does that say? I mean, from the one perspective, people say, well, it's an opiate of the masses. But from another point, you see, deep inside, we all feel a profound wisdom, a unity with life, a communion with life, the essential nature of our own being. And that whole thing is supported and cultured through our religions. And so if you see, if we turn our back on that because for some reason it doesn't make intellectual sense to us or what have you, there's a tremendous loss there. And see, that's the thing, as our understanding of what the Veda is, the structure of existence, the nature of existence, as that deepens, even though it's through a Vedic tradition, it enhances and supports our understanding of our own religion, whatever that religion is. Is that making sense, Scott?
Sure. And it also, it just seems like, all of these things had their purity points, where they were more, like, like in touch or in line with, the transcendent, or, where this
Yeah.
knowledge is coming from. And now as they start to go away from it, they start to get more and more lost.
And that's why I really like to distinguish between faith and knowledge. To me, faith, and I know people use the word in a different way, and I'm fine with that. But just for me, the idea of faith is kind of like, well, I don't really know, so I just have faith. It's kind of like blind faith or something. Whereas, particularly now in this day and age, with all the unified field understanding and the deeper understanding of the mechanic of creation from a perspective of physics, the knowledge that's there in the Veda, it does make sense. And so as it makes sense, then we can rely on the rigors of the intellectual understanding to purify out, Scotty, any of superstition, or I forget how you put it, but any distortions or any well, look, I mean, some of these religions, I mean, terrorism in the name of God or what have you. I mean, and even back with the Crusades. I don't know that much about the Crusades, but from the little I do know, I mean, a bunch of knights going over to Israel and killing a bunch of people. Like, people with better historical knowledge of it might say I said it all wrong, but you get the point. That is our understanding, not just from that feeling that we can all feel, that place where we feel our oneness with, and fill in your own blank. God is, to me, the most meaningful. But that sense of unity, that sense of oneness, that sense of divinity, whatever word you choose to use there. But to have that clarified intellectually is great. And if we've been exposed to maybe more of a superficial, if you will, understanding of our religion, and so then we take a step back and say it doesn't make any sense, and so we reject the whole thing, that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's a shame. It's a shame, because the power of religion, the power of spiritual understanding, not just blind faith, but real knowledge, it's accessible now, which is incredible to me that, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever, when there wasn't the rigorous intellectual understanding available to people, they felt it inside. They knew it, And so we have to understand that people associate their religion with that deep sense of divinity within their being. So if in the holiday season you kind of poo-poo the religion or Christmas or whatever because, it doesn't make any sense and stuff like that, you have to understand you're trampling not just on the religion, but for the person, that depth of their soul, that fine fabric of their being, that knowing that transcends even the need for intellectual understanding. Look at the temples people built before they really had any rigorous understanding. Why did they do that? Because they could feel it. They knew there was truth there, you see? And so we support our religion with whatever degree of intellectual understanding we may have, but we appreciate and honor that deeper value. Because then by celebrating Christmas together as a family, if you're Christian, then you're culturing that fine fabric at the depth of the soul of all of the family members and of a community and of a society and of a world. Huh, Scotty?
Yeah. Here's one for you. Like,
Okay.
Take Christianity. Jesus, like, he's the one that, let's, if we take it from that, Jesus drops the knowledge on everybody, and then it starts to perpetuate out as we
Yeah,
go,
like propagate out or whatever.
propagate out to everybody, right? So their understanding of the knowledge at first, it's like, okay, it's from you to me, or Jesus to you to me. And it seems like, does it work like that when you're dropping the pebble in the water, where it starts to go out, and then those waves start to get further and further out? They start to dissipate in their understanding of what is that what's happening? And do you need somebody that embodies that knowledge of Christianity, or what Jesus was really saying, to kind of like, it's almost like an electricity, where you send in the electricity and you need to like recharge it and send it down the line further. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. For one, I mean, all the writings, the scriptures about Jesus, my understanding, were like hundreds of years after his death. I mean, I know I give a lecture and people walk out of the lecture hall and try to repeat what I say, and that's not quite it. So after 100 years, but now here's the thing. Once you get onto it, and however you go about it, if you do it through physics, if you do it through Vedic knowledge, if you do it from rigorous study, what happens is the scriptures that are there, the Bible, deeper understandings of what's there, and oftentimes appreciated just on the surface, so superficially, such an echo of truth that some people just reject the whole thing. But once you get onto the whole mechanism and the nature of the whole thing, then you start to appreciate those verses, for example, in the Bible, on deeper and deeper levels. And that's true of any religion. You can take Vedic literature and take it on a very superficial level, or you can look deeper. You can take the Bible, take it on a superficial level and look deeper. And so, yeah, even though Jesus may not be physically around anymore, that knowledge that makes sense deep within us is accessible if we're willing to really take a look. But the thing is, I mean, let's take a look at the human species. People tend to live in, I don't mean any offense, but small little worlds. They have a worldview that they've been trained or indoctrinated into, or culturally oriented around, and they don't want it messed with. And in that regard, what is that? Simon and Garfunkel, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. They'll bring in whatever knowledge resonates with that little worldview, but they don't really expand that worldview and evolve that worldview. And that's very much the state of humanity. And you can even understand why. Because, again, they see that little worldview and they feel the depth of divinity within them, and they equate the two. And so they don't want that little worldview messed with, So human evolution, I mean, real spiritual evolution, is it's a subtle path. And it's all about, as Adi Shankar said, the art of discernment. Are you able to discern? Because it's not really discernment if you have a worldview or a longing or psychological state. And so what you accept as truth or see as truth or are willing to look at and embrace, and what you aren't, is really based on a very superficial perspective, as opposed, and because that's not discernment. What's the word there? It's judgment.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between judgment and discernment. You see?
Yeah. It's funny. I was just thinking about like a visual of that, of like, if you're assessing of whatever particular situation you have, what it actually is, or not the projection, but here's what it is. And then you have your perception that you're trying to line that up with. But, you know, if you're coming not from the depth of where discernment should come from, you're coming from that projection of what.
Yeah, your identity with that superficial perspective.
Right, that line won't line up. You know, of those three things. You know,
and so then it's just rejected as sacrilege or whatever. You know, don't go there. Don't make me think about that. You know,
right.
Whereas really evolution, spiritual evolution, is about the art of discernment. You know, I've really, and I've said this before, I think in podcasts, but living in these mountains of Western North Carolina, I've had some great conversations with Baptist ministers. These guys, at least all the ones that I've sat and talked with, are deep thinkers. And I remember one of them had just heard about me. And so when we finally met, he said to me, I got one question for you. And he said, I'm thinking of different questions he asked, but at any rate, the one that was on my mind, he says, do you believe that Jesus is the only way? It's all he wanted. He just answered me that question.
Right.
Yeah. And so I said to him, well, I said, if by Jesus, you mean the Christ, who and what he knew he was deep within his own being, then yeah, I definitely believe that. The Christ is the only way. You could use a different word, Chaitanya. There's only one Christ. There's only one Chaitanya. There's only one unified field. And that's the only way. There's no going around it or finding a viable alternative. There's no substitute.
Right. So what's your definition of that, right? You got to say to him.
Well,
it's like,
yeah. So then I said, well, but if by Jesus, you mean, you know, the chunk of flesh, the guy on a personality level, then no, I can't believe I told him that nobody went to heaven until after Jesus was born. See, the Christ is eternal. The unified field is eternal, and it underlies all existence. So the question then becomes, can you discern? What's the distinction between what you mean? What do you mean by Jesus? And what do you mean by Christ? Is that making sense, Scott?
Absolutely.
Yeah. He loved it. He went from, and we had a long conversation, you know, and he went from, at first, just from what he heard about me, who is this guy? He's very skeptical, to inviting me. He runs a church in the valley here in Asheville, wanted me to come and speak, you know. And so that's what I'm talking about. Let's deepen our appreciation. The knowledge is there, but we can't embrace it on too superficial of a level, because if we do that, then we're either living in denial of deeper understandings, or our perspective is limited and opens to fanaticism, superstition, all that sort of thing. But just because our understanding of what people think of when they think of Christianity, just because our understanding of it is so superficial that we can't buy it, and same with Hinduism or all these different religions, it's not okay really to turn our back on it, because we're sterilizing the human condition, the true nature of what it means to be human. We don't do it because it's an opiate for the masses. We do it because there's truth there that resonates with the depth of our soul. And our whole mission in life, if you will, is to take that depth, that thing that we are one with, that source that is the source of all knowledge, wisdom, and intelligence at the basis of all existence, and facilitating the welling up of that through all levels of our being. And if our worldview is too small, too contracted, too narrow, then even if it's done in the name of God, it can obstruct that welling up of the divinity within us that is one with God, and having it emerge through all of life and our life and radiate out through all of humanity, the whole world, you see. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Sure, for sure.
Yeah.
It was funny. One time I was having a conversation with one of the employees at our work that he was a real born again Christian, and we had been talking about some of the knowledge of some of the other, like Vedic, and he's like, well, they have all these different gods, and there really is only one God. And I was like, well, I think there was something in the Bible that was talking about the many faces of God,
Yeah.
and I was like, it seems to me almost like, what these Vedic guys were doing, where they were, of those faces of God, they were naming those faces of God, or those
Correct.
expressions of God. That's how they did that same thing. It's like, it's almost like, everybody's talking about the same basis
Yeah,
of
to my experience in my conversations with Hindus, with Vedic pundits, and just people that come visit the temple, if you get into a conversation about that, they're all very proud to say there's only one God. These are just all different aspects of the one, different faces of God.
Yeah.
And that's also really how we should respect and honor all of the different religions. They're different faces of the one. And just because you want to call it Shiva, or you want to call it the Christ, or you want to call it Jesus, or you want to call it whatever, it doesn't detract from that. It does not detract from that.
Isn't that there's even competitions within religions, right? Like even the like you said, the Shiva, the group, or the Vishnu group, or the no, who's the one, that kind of thing too.
Well, yeah, see, it gets really interesting even from a perspective of the structure of existence, the quantum mechanical nature, the geometric nature, and it's like you can embrace that wholeness from one perspective. Like in the Shiva Puranas say, the Shiva is the highest God. There's no other God. All the other gods bow down to Shiva. Then you pick up the Vishnu Puranas and it says Vishnu's the highest one, and then even within Hinduism, some become so fanatical about like the Shiva Puranas and what it's saying that they kind of don't want to have anything to do with Vishnu almost. I mean, there is that, and they're just small components, but of the religion, small factions or cults or whatever you want to call it, but they actually oppose one another. But the thing is, if you really, that's Scotty, that diagram I show in my classes a lot. You look at this diagram, you look at it one way, it looks like it's a diagram of two boxes. You look at it another way, it's three boxes. It's kind of like looking at a kaleidoscope. You can see different patterns. Well, it's the same structure. It's just you're identifying, pulling out different patterns, different faces of God, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happens with the Jews and the Christians too, and all that. Yeah. So it's the mechanical nature, I guess.
And even the idea, like, was Jesus a son of God? Do you believe Jesus was a son of God? Well, the question becomes, what do you mean by the son of God? What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And so many. I mean, geez, I love watching or listening to Christian radio and stuff, because all those different things, you can see how if you pick up what a lot of these different Bible quotes and things are, you pick it up on a superficial level, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But then again, if people choose to just, that's how deep they want to go, and they're still very Christian, they love God, they believe, then that's their choice. And if they're good with that, okay. But it's a little bit like a cell phone. You can use a cell phone without really understanding the mechanics of how it works. And if you're good with that, okay. But the thing is, there have to be people there that understand the deeper underlying mechanic of how it works. Otherwise, the whole thing just becomes a mess. And before you know it, a cell phone is not what it could be, Does that make sense, Scott?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So the knowledge is there. It's just a matter of embracing it. And I guess the final appeal here is, I don't care if you're atheist, Hindu, Christian, whatever. When it comes to celebrating these holidays, when it comes to celebrating Christmas, to wish Merry Christmas, to go in a mall and there are Christmas decorations and there's that whole feeling, or if you're in India and it's a Hindu celebration, to honor that, to respect that, to embrace that, to enjoy that, to know that that is something that's feeding the fine fabric of humanity and life. And through that, we nurture the psyche, the emotions, the health, physical, mental, all levels of a whole society. And when we turn our back on that, we are tearing apart or assaulting the fine fabric of what it really means to fully express your own true nature, your own divinity.
They're all just patterns in that kaleidoscope, right?
Yeah. And what gets cultured in a person's physiology by virtue of their cultural background is something to be honored. It's not a no holds barred, that stuff resonates all the way down into the DNA, you see. All right. So if there's nothing else, I think that will do it for today, Scotty. Anything else?
Just real quick, I was wondering, is it good for us to look at it? These are things for us to culture ourselves, not like impose and beat on other people with. Kind of, I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but or a good way to look at it. You know what I mean by that?
I think that as there, see, it's a almost paradox there.
Yeah.
Do we honor another person for where they're at? Do we tolerate? Or is it tolerance? Or is it giving space? You see, those kind of things. Yeah. There's a subtle distinction that makes a huge difference between tolerance and giving space. Everybody evolves in their own way, at their own rate, from their own angle of approach. And to be able to hold that and support that, and support then their own growth and their own evolution, is a subtle art. And that can't be prescribed in books because it's riddled with paradox. You see? How to nurture and support the growth of people. It's highly elusive, you see. Is that responsive, Scotty?
Yeah. It's just, it just seems like it's so prevalent these days where everybody wants to,
polarize.
Yeah, polarize.
Everybody wants to polarize. Everybody wants to ramrod their little worldview on all of humanity. If everybody just thought the way I did, the whole world would be fine. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way, We all, if we're each a molecule of water, like I've talked about in previous, trickling down that mountain stream to return to the ocean of oneness eventually, it's all different paths, And if you're going over a waterfall molecule and you're looking at another molecule that's stuck in an eddy current, doesn't do any good to hate them, Yeah. Okie doke. I guess that's it for now, unless there's more, Scotty. We good?
There's always more, but next time.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Merry Christmas.